Parshas Vayeshev, Tavshin Ayin Dalet. I want to encourage everybody just to take a seat. I know there's not a lot of room here. Sometimes a little crowded back there, but everybody just take a seat, listen in. The week before Hanukkah begins, so we have a lot of good, warm stuff to talk about. The Medrash Rabbah in this week's Parsha, in Parshas Vayeshev, says the following. It says that Yosef HaTzadik, Yosef said like this. Yosef said, Abba nisnasa, my father was tested, Zekeni nisnasa, my grandfathers, my ancestors were tested, Va'ani, but me, myself, Eini misnasa, I haven't had to go through nisyonis. And to that says the Medrash, HaKadosh Baruch Hu answered the following. HaKadosh Baruch Hu answered, Chayecha, you should just know, She'ani menaseh oizcha Yosef mehem. Yosef, I want you to know, HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, I will test you more than I tested your previous ancestors. So really, it's mashma from this medrash that the nisoyon of Yosef was actually bigger and more difficult than the nisyonis of the avos. Yosef had a bigger nisoyon. And really, once we're saying that, it must be that would actually include, imagine the nisoyon Avraham Avinu had in Ur Kasdim, the nisoyon of the Akedah. So from this medrash we see that for some reason the nisoyon of Yosef was more than the nisoyon of Ur Kasdim, Akedah, anything that came before. This week we're going to begin to say Hallel each day of Hanukkah. We're going to begin to say Hallel. And one of the things we're going to say in the Hallel is Hayom Ro'ah Vayonos. That the Yam Suf, by Kriyas Yam Suf, what made the Yam split? So we say Hayom Ro'ah Vayonos. And we ask the question, what did the Yam see that it ran, that it sort of split, that it split for Klal Yisrael? So the answer that we give is that in the schus of the Atzmas Yosef, they brought in the schus of Yosef, and they had the Atzmas Yosef, the bones from Yosef that they were going to rebury in Eretz Yisrael, they had with them. In the schus of the Yam, seeing that, so the Yam Suf split for Klal Yisrael. Zot the Nesivos Shalom, that in the schus, when it says Hayom Ro'ah Vayonos, in the schus of the word Vayonos, that it says in this week's Parsha, where Yosef took off and ran out from the Eishes Potiphar, from Yosef, that schus that he was a menatzeach, and that nisoyon, in the schus of that, Hayom Ro'ah Vayonos, in the schus of the Vayonos that Yosef did, that's what made him Yosef HaTzadik. That's what made Yosef who he was, by Yosef running out from this nisoyon. And it seems from here also that the schus, it seems, of Moshe Rabbeinu and the schus of all 600,000 plus Yidden of Klal Yisrael that left Mitzrayim, that wasn't enough to split the Yam Suf. What was enough? The schus of Yosef. It took the schus of the Aroinah Shel Yosef. That was the schus that actually caused that the Yam should split. So it is mashma from Chazal, like we said, that the nisoyon of Yosef was actually the toughest nisoyon that there was. Like the Gemara says, Masechta Yuma, Daf Lamed Hey, Omid Beis, the Gemara says that Yosef mechayev es harishoyim. And we're going to learn it in Daf Yomi in a couple of weeks, in Masechta Yuma, this Gemara, that if somebody comes, imagine somebody comes to the Bezdin Shalmaila, La'achamei V'esrim, and says that he couldn't do this and this because he was busy fighting and dealing with his Yetzer Hara. So the retort to that will be that they're going to tell you in Shemayim that you could not have had as big a nisoyon, you couldn't have had as big a battle as Yosef HaTzadik. So really, how can we say that? We can ask a question right here that begs to be asked. The question is, we know that Yosef was born to Yaakov Avinu. How could you possibly compare Yosef to someone else who may have not been born into such a good environment? And everybody always has this excuse, right? When you ask somebody, how come you didn't do this? How come you do that? Well, had I been born or brought up in this house, had I gone to this yeshiva, had I been in this environment, I would have been different. So, how can we compare? How could we say that Yosef is Machayev the Rishoyim if Yosef was brought up in the house of Yaakov Avinu? Had we been brought up in the house, had anybody been brought up in the house of Yaakov Avinu, he would say that I would have been different too. So how is he Machayev the Rishoyim? So the Nesivos Shalom says, let's look at this inyan of Nisayin. Let's look at the Nisayin of the Akedah. The Akedah we know was, of course, a very, very big Nisayin. But let me ask you a question. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu would come to you, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu would tell you to do anything in the world, what would you do? Would you do it, or wouldn't you do it? Avadi, you would do it. So anything HaKadosh Baruch Hu told you to do, you would do. So what was the big nisayon of Avraham Avinu by the Akedah? Avraham Avinu was told directly from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, take Yitzchak, do the Akedah, right? If any of us had a direct dialogue with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu told us to do something, Avadi, he would do it. So the Nesivos Shalom has a mahalach over here that explains it just a little bit different. The Nesivos Shalom says that when HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Avraham Avinu these words, take your son, es yechidcha asher ahavta. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Avraham Avinu asher ahavta, at that moment that HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Avraham Avinu to take his son that he loves, Zok Nesivos Shalom, he brings down that all the love in the world and all the love that a person could have for their child, everything came together for Avraham Avinu in that moment, and the love that he had for Yitzchak Avinu at that moment was the most unbelievable love in the world. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to make the Nisayon greater, and that's why that happened. When he said, take your son that you love, Avraham Avinu loved Yitzchak at that moment more than any other time and any other thing that he could have done. And he says it's the same thing is with Yosef. That at the time of the Nisayon of Yosef, at the time of this Nisayon, all the Yetzer Hara in the world was with Yosef. When it came time for Yosef to face this Nisayon, he had the biggest Yetzer Hara for this taiva that he could have ever had. All the Yetzer Haras in the world, the same way by Avraham Avinu, he had all the Ava that moment. At this moment, Yosef HaTzadik had all the Yetzer Hara in the world. So really, the reason Yosef is Mechayev the Rishoyim, because at that moment, everything was forgotten. It wasn't that Yosef was brought up in the house of Yaakov Avinu. At that moment, Yosef had a Yetzer Hara just like any other person. He had the same, if not more powerful Yetzer Hara as any Rasha or any Baal Taiva. And by overcoming that, that's why we say in the Schus of Yosef, Hayom Ra Vayonos, that at the time of Nisayon, it didn't matter that he was brought up in the house of Yaakov Avinu. At the time of the Nisayon, Yosef HaTzadik had the same Yetzer Hara that any other person would have had. The Medrash says on the Pasuk by Avraham Avinu, the Pasuk says, Vayoytze oisai hachutza. HaKadosh Baruch Hu took Avraham Avinu outdoors. Vayoymer, and he said, Habet noah shamayma, look at the sky, usfor es hakochavim, count the stars, and the Pasuk continues, Ko yeh zarecha. Go outside, count the stars, and see if you can count the stars. Your children, HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Avraham Avinu, will be like that. Why? So why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Medrash says, why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu have to take Avraham Avinu outside? The Medrash says, Al pi derech hateva, Avraham Avinu could not have children. HaKadosh Baruch Hu had to take him hachutza, take him outside of the Seder Hateva, so he can give Avraham Avinu a bracha that he should have children. Because under normal circumstances it couldn't have happened. Hachutza means taking Avraham Avinu out of the Teva and putting him outside that. And the Medrash is medayik on the same word in our Parsha. The The pasuk says in our parsha by Yosef, Vayonos Vayetze Hachutza, that Yosef HaTzadik, he ran. Where did he go? Vayetze Hachutza. He ran outside. Why does the pasuk say Vayetze? The Nesivos Shalom says to tell us that Yosef had to be then just like Avraham Avinu. The same way Avraham Avinu could not have children, that was his teva, and he had to go outside of his teva, that by the nisoyan of Yosef, the taiva was so great that Yosef had to go outside of the derech hateva of Olam Hazeh. In order to resist and to withstand the Yetzer Hara here, he had to go out. And only with the schus avos of being like his grandfather, like his great-grandfather, Avraham Avinu, and lifting himself up with supernatural effort, Yosef was able to weather this nisoyan. And that's what we mean, says in Nesivos Shalom, when we said the medrash at the beginning, Chayecha sh'ani misnasa oischa yoser mehem. Believe me, Yosef, HaKadosh Baruch Hu said that I will test you more than the avos. Yosef got an nisoyan that al pi derech hateva he could not withstand. But only by going out of his teva, by fighting it with a supernatural way, was he able to go over that. So we ask the question, wouldn't everybody have done that? By Avraham Avinu. We said, HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Avraham Avinu something. Wouldn't we all listen to that? So we have to understand, says in Nesivos Shalom, that especially at the Akedah, what was the problem by the Akedah? The problem was not with what Hashem told Avraham Avinu. Avraham Avinu, that the HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Avraham Avinu, go do it. Maybe any one of us would have done that. The problem by the Akedah was that HaKadosh Baruch Hu had also told Avraham Avinu, Ki v'yitzchak yikar lecha zara, that you are going to have many children. You're going to have children from Yitzchak. And now, Ba'alei La'oila, HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells him, go bring Yitzchak on the Akedah. What happened to what you told him before? It seems like a stira. But Avraham Avinu faced what Hashem told him at that exact time. And he said, HaKadosh Baruch Hu's telling me to do this now? I have nothing to think about. Forget about the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave me a bracha, that I'm going to have children from Yitzchak. Forget about it. Right now, HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells me to do this, and this is what I have to do. Eishes Potifar saw the same kind of thing as Avraham Avinu. Eishes Potifar saw, says in Nesivos Shalom, that there was going to be children coming from Yosef through her family. And we know that it did because Yosef, through her daughter, Yosef ended up marrying the daughter. So she saw, she saw that the way the world was supposed to be is that she was supposed to have children through Yosef. And Yosef knew that too. But what happened here now? Right here now, Yosef saw that he had a nisoyan. And this was a great nisoyan. So Yosef said, this is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants me to do now. Hashem, I'm supposed to have children from her. That's not for now. Right now I have a nisoyan. I have to fight this nisoyan. And what did Yosef do? We say, Ra, the most yukna shel Aviv. At that moment, Yosef saw the midas ha'emes of Aviv, of Yaakov Avinu, that how can he act right now bad in this situation? Now I have a situation, I have to fight the Yetzer Hara. And there's a mistake. Nesivos Shalom says, sometimes we say, Ra d'mus diuknoi. We think that it was some magic. He saw Yaakov Avinu, he looked out his window, he saw a picture. No. Ra d'mus diuknoi means that Yosef always saw in every situation, he thought, how would my father Yaakov act in this situation? What would he do right now? That's Ra d'mus diuknoi. And that's what we have to remember. Sometimes we have to think, when we're faced with an nisoyan, when we're faced with a taiva, when we're faced with a Yetzer Hara, we have to think, what would my father, what would my grandfather have done right now in this situation? Block everything else out. Everything, all your other cheshbonis, what you think, you have to block it out. We have to do the emes of Yaakov. Do what's right for that situation. And that's the lesson we learned from the Medrash in this week's Parsha. Now Chanukah's coming up. Let's take this lesson and grow in Ruchnias and face the Nisyonis the way Yosef HaTzadik would.